Hey guys, we're here with another Foundations video where we'll be talking about drums and bass and how they fit together in a modern worship context. If you've been around the music scene for long enough, you've probably heard people talk about how crucial it is for bass and drums to lock in with one another. Before we look at how this is done from a practical standpoint, let's first take a look at the philosophical reason why these instruments are so often paired together and why it's important for you to do the same.
Firstly, bass and drums are the two instruments that comprise the rhythm section. Certainly there are other instruments that could fit in this category, but in our modern worship context, this is typically all we have in the rhythm section of our bands. Both bass and drums are contributing to the percussiveness or rhythm of the band's sound. No other instrument can make you move the way drums and bass can, and certainly not when they're locked in, as we'll discuss shortly. All other instruments find the bulk of their contribution on the melodic side. What's interesting here to note is that bass contributes to both the rhythm and the melody, as bass plays chords and parts as well, which is why bass is so often referred to as the bridge between rhythm and melody, between essentially drums and the rest of the band. When we search for an answer for why drums and bass should lock in or consider one another, we have to start right here. Bass connects drums with the rest of the band. If drums and bass aren't in sync, then the rhythm and the melodic sections of your band will be disjointed. If you look at the frequencies both of these instruments occupy, you find another compelling argument for why they should be mindful of one another. If you look between 30 and 100 hertz, the only contributing instruments you'll see are kick, bass, and toms, drums, and bass. Of course, there are elements of both of these instruments that go beyond this range, but it's worth noting that there's a significant area of the frequency spectrum that only these two instruments are capable of occupying. And that's a great reason they should be on the same page.
Now, let's take a few moments and look at how these two instruments practically lock in or work together. This is primarily accomplished by matching the plucks of the bass to your kick pattern. The timing of these two elements is imperative, as we'll see in this next example. We're going to play 3 recordings for you from the song Who You Say I Am by Hillsong, and if you have headphones, we encourage you to use them here so that you can really hear the kick and the bass. In these recordings, you'll hear 2 examples of this done poorly, one from drums and one from bass, and finally, one example of this done correctly, where both drums and bass complement one another. Hopefully, from that example, you were able to see the need for bass players and drummers to adopt this ideology and a good example of the impact this can make when done correctly. Maybe you listened to the first 2 recordings and thought it sounded fine, but the improvement made in the 3rd recording is undeniable. The coordination here is not just in the decision of where to play, it's also in the execution, it's in the timing. Another way to practically lock in with one another is to match dynamics. This can play out in a number of ways. For example, the bassist might play higher on the neck when the drums are less prevalent. Maybe this is in a verse where drums aren't fully in and you want to build tension and save a little dynamically. That will make the moment you drop down and play your full lower notes more impactful when drums really come in. Some moments may call for a little more grit and definition from bass as well. This could mean using a pick and digging into the string a little harder, but it could also look like kicking on an overdrive pedal if you have one. For drums, this could look like choosing to hold off on your kick until bass comes in. If you're swelling into a chorus, don't kick on beat 1 of the chorus unless bass also comes in. If you do, it will probably sound harsh and out of place. Instead, try a cymbal swell that washes smoothly into the chorus. Additionally, let's say you're on a down bridge and you're preparing to build. You may start to build anticipation by playing lightly on cymbals or even on toms, but don't play kick until bass comes in. This is an easy way you can match them dynamically.
Let's now look even closer at some steps you can take right now to improve locking in with your bass player or drummer. Firstly, you must prepare well and learn your parts. Drummers, this looks like digging into each song and nailing the exact kick pattern of the recording. Both drummers and bass players tend to fall back on certain grooves and patterns in a moment of insufficient preparation. For bass players, this might look like playing whole notes, quarter notes, or even simply chord changes instead of the written part. Like the recording before, you might sound fine doing this, but you'll be missing the opportunity for greater cohesion and effectiveness. I promise you, it's worth the extra time and preparation. In our context at Grace Bible Church, we don't have a midweek rehearsal. We come together for the very first time on the day of the service to learn how to fit together as a band. And that's far too late in the game to be adjusting and frantically trying to learn how to match one another, which is why it's important to arrive ready to play the part the other person is expecting you to play. If not, the next step is to communicate. For this to work, it's critical that you two are on the same page. If you aren't planning to play the expected part, communicate with the other one so they can adjust their plan accordingly. The more you can communicate or arrange prior to the event, the more likely you'll be to remember your parts and play in sync with one another.
We hope this video has been helpful to you. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at worship@grace-bible.org. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.